the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
All right, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome. We are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for our first ever live Tech Corner. And I couldn't pick a better person to bring live than Erich Kron. Erich, what's happening, buddy?
Oh, man, I don't know, but that's quite the introduction. Thank you so much. You just hit me right in the feels there. Such wonderful words from you.
Thank you. Did you like the guitar, by the way, on the intro? Isn't that pretty cool?
Yeah. I was all like, I was going to mention that too. That was fantastic. Talk about getting you in the mood for something, right?
Right.
Now the bar is set high, so I can't mess this up.
You cannot mess this up. For those tuning in and watching us live, good morning, comment hello wherever you are on planet Earth. We'll be answering your questions as we do this today. So this isn't just a traditional Tech Corner. For those that will be listening after the fact, you can follow us on social media, and then you'll be able to join us live for a lot of these conversations. If you're able to, I know that everyone has work to do. It is Friday, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere right now. And so, pour yourself a little beer, a cup of coffee, whatever it is that you drink on today's show. We're here and live, and we've got people joining us from Jacksonville, Florida. That's not far from where you're at, Erich.
No, I'm in the Tampa area here, so that's just kind of up and around.
That's just right across the swamp.
Yeah, the whole state's a swamp. Let's be clear, right? So that pretty much describes anywhere in Florida.
Hello, Danielle from Massachusetts. Good morning. So we're going to talk about insider threat. And not the traditional insider threat today. We will talk about InternGate a little bit, because that's what I've named it. I've named it InternGate. I think that in cybersecurity, we fail to create good hashtags for really bad stories.
But when there's some sort of a vulnerability out, we can create a logo and web page and all kinds of stuff to go around with that, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. We can, but we can't create a hashtag for InternGate. So earlier this week, I just did a post with nothing on it, but hashtag InternGate. That's it. That's like,
nice.
We'll see what happens. And a few people picked up. We've got someone from Orlando, which is like right in the middle of the swamp. And Danielle loves KnowBe4 products. So that's good.
Oh, sweet. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
That's awesome. Yes. KnowBe4 is where Erich works, and where he's a security awareness advocate. But we were just talking about this before we went live.
Yeah. Titles.
You don't only know security awareness.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about this. I mean, my background, I've been in security in all kinds of areas, and I'm not just a security awareness guy. As we've had some talks, James, about this already. Yeah. I had years of experience with the DoD. I was a security manager at the 2nd Regional Cyber Center, Western Hemisphere. Very impressive sounding place. I've been in all kinds of areas.
It's really just a building.
Well, it is just a building, but we did manage all of the Active Directory and network infrastructure for North America for the Army. So we had some pretty cool stuff going on there.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I've done so much more than just security awareness stuff, although it is important.
I think security awareness is just as important as anything else, just so you know. So we've got people here joining us. Another comment here from Balrub Kara. I'm using KnowBe4 and I love it. We weren't really supposed to talk about KnowBe4, right. But Megan right now is going to be ecstatic.
We're going to rename this KnowBe4 Corner, right?
Yeah, KnowBe4 Corner. All right, so let's talk a little bit about insider threats, right? So InternGate obviously wasn't just a insider threat; it was an accidental insider threat issue.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for an insider threat to be an accident too. So we always think of insider threat, we think of like Snowden and all that kind of like stuff like that. But insider threats are also often accidental. So like in this case, using what was it, SolarWinds 1234 or something like that,
right,
as a password, right? Okay, so yeah, that was a mistake. That happens, right? But this is a case where they had an intern doing this stuff, and they made this password. Now, first of all, we got to think about interns, right? Interns are typically people that are starting to work somewhere because they're either new to it or they need to gain experience, et cetera, right? So we really, if we're using interns for things, we should have some controls around that too. Now,
that's a very smart idea. That might be the smartest thing you've said this far on the show. We're 6 minutes and 18 seconds in, so that's really good.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to use interns, understand that, and the fact that this intern set that up and then it went for years without ever being changed. Nobody ever said anything that used this password going, gee, this is a bad password. You can't just pile that all on the intern. There were several different things that broke down in this case.
Yeah, blaming it on the intern, and I think that's, if you look at insider threat, right, there's the accidental stuff, which is what happened with this intern. It wasn't malicious. He didn't intend, the intern, he or she did not intend for this to happen, right? They were probably simply told to set up the FTP server somewhere and use a basic password, and they figured that they're just going to use SolarWinds 123, hand it off to whoever they were handing it off to, and that person was going to go in and do the responsible cyber hygiene thing, which is immediately change the password.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense that is a way that this could have gone, right? And then that person whoever took it over, and we should also be going back and looking at this stuff. We should be reviewing this stuff on a regular basis and making sure that these things are in place and correct. Because frankly, in this industry, guidance changes, things that we know change over the years. So we need to have a process in place where we're reviewing our controls, including passwords and how they're managed over the years. I mean, if you look at password management stuff, we've moved from, password ways where, we're talking about long, complex, all these kind of stuff. And then NIST steps back and punts and says, okay, maybe we don't need to go through all that. There were some recent changes in the NIST guidance on passwords. So we need to have a mechanism where we're even checking that stuff on a regular basis. And I think that was obviously missed here. And I get it. SolarWinds is a big company. It's not an easy thing to do. It's just a lesson we can all learn from that.
No, what you just said, I'm going to argue with you over, because I don't care how big you are. That's not an excuse.
No, it's not I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm just saying, okay, so here's as organizations get larger, it gets more complex to manage these sorts of things. It's not an excuse,
right? But it is you bring in an intern, you bring in someone who's training for a job, right? The last person you blame for something like this is the intern. You can say, you know what? We had a new group of people set this up a few years ago. The supervision on these people failed through. And that's why, unfortunately, this event took place. We've now corrected it internally. We've put in a little bit more safeguards. We've reviewed the way we allow interns or new people that are, within their first 90 days or 180 days in the company, interact with different sets of technology and so forth. There's a bunch of different ways to handle it than to go in front of Congress and blame an intern.
Yeah, you got to own it. You got to own it 100%. Be transparent about what it is that happened. When we talk about like ransomware attacks, I've talked to a number of people about this, and the response to ransomware attacks is very much where it's kind of a do or die from a PR situation. Did they own it? Did they say, okay, this is what happened? Or even data breaches for that matter. This is what happened. This is why it went wrong. This is what we've done to improve what's happening. And being open and transparent about that makes the people feel better about the fact that, okay, this happened and now they're doing something about it. Now, then you have the Uber side, which is like, what data breach, and then it all goes bad on you, right?
Yeah,
it's a PR nightmare if you try to cover that stuff up. So own it, be transparent, and say what you did about it. Learn from it.
Yeah. Paul brings up when you were talking a little bit earlier about the separation of duties for interns and so forth. And there's got to be some separation of duties here. It can't just be all in one place or all centralized. Whenever I see anything centralized with one leader or with one person, you realize this is going to fail miserably.
Yeah. That's another insider threat, to be honest with you. So you have the one person, let's go a little different direction here. Do you remember years ago, it was San Francisco, the network there. I think it was their fiber WAN, the backbone there. There was like one IT guy that knew all the stuff. And so when someone would come with them or come to them with the problem, they'd be like, oh, that's a Bob thing. That's a Bob thing. It always went to Bob, right? And then Bob left and basically held the city's network at ransom because he was the only one that knew how anything worked. That was another issue with a person like that. So I actually worked in a place years ago. We were an MSP and we had the one guy that knew VMware, and he was where everything went for VMware. We never trained up anyone else to do VMware. And I was like, this is a problem. And then of course he got some DUIs and things like that happened. And it was a real issue for the organization. And that was a problem there, is having the one person. He was our threat. He was our risk right there.
But that's the complacency within insider training, insider threat. So when you look at an insider threat, complacency is typically the next word that comes right after insider threat when it's not malicious. And even when it is malicious, it's also that. Kevin, sorry, let's start with Danielle here for some comments. So Danielle says auditors get one-off accounts too. Who's checking those accounts? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Who's managing that? Who's doing that sort of stuff? Absolutely.
Kevin Gross, hey, Kevin says, hopefully this won't hurt internships. Yeah, I don't think it will. I think you're going to see more defined internships though, because organizations still want interns. They're just going to have a better control and definition for. So interns may go back to just making coffee runs and getting bagels for the staff meeting for a little while before they get their hands on a computer.
Frankly, I don't think it's going to have any impact on internships. We in the information security space, we look at these things and this is kind of our whole world. But in the grand scheme of things, where internships happen throughout the business world, most people are going to be totally unaware of this or not care about this. Now, I think the people in our industry need to take this as a lesson to think about, what are we doing with our interns? What are we allowing them to do? How are we managing our interns? I think that's the question that needs to really happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Jonathan Arnold. He's a LinkedIn user, but I'm able to kind of get his info here. So in an over litigious society, admitting to making a mistake means to be sued. Let me address that for a second. I agree with Jonathan here. That's why I made a call on the practitioner brief yesterday, or I think the day before. I forgot. All the days seem like one to me now until Friday, because today is like, yay, Friday. But one of the calls I've made is, what if Congress, what if legislatures actually passed a information sharing bill with immunity to companies that undergo a cyber attack? Right? Increase the mandate of CISA. Here's an idea. Increase the mandate of CISA. Allow CISA to not only work across the government federal infrastructure, but also into the private sector, which now they have a budget for, I think, only 2 or 3 regional CISA reps per region, and the country is divided into 7 different regions. So it's like 21 people. Like, that's just not enough, right? Let's push that up to 100 people, right? Let's fund them and open, 79 more job recs within CISA. And then let's pass an immunity bill saying that if you admit to a breach, and let's define what gross negligence is. So you're immune up until gross negligence. And I think we can all agree that gross negligence, we can define what gross negligence can be, and not write it in a way where you're going to get sued a bunch of times and a court's going to have to define and set the precedent of what gross negligence is. But there's enough people within the NSA and the FBI and CISA and within DoD that can really define for lawmakers what gross negligence from a security perspective would constitute. But let's give those organizations a legal immunity to do that, because that's the only way we're going to get this, right? That's the only way this is going to happen.
Yeah, but ultimately the legal part of it, the legal immunity is probably the smaller issue here, I would argue. And that is, it would have to be put in a mechanism where it was non-identifiable, right? It would have to be something where the organization wouldn't be defined, because as soon as that gets out, it doesn't matter. The shareholders may have problems. They may have issues. It doesn't mean that they're going to be necessarily fined by regulators or something like that. But what about, reputational damage and things like that? That's just as big as it would be the legal side. So, look at like FS-ISAC, right? I mean, there are ways that they share information within these organizations there that not everybody gets to see. That's not a bad thing. That's fairly decent. And a lot of that stuff is anonymized when it's put out to the public. Like, we're seeing this sort of thing or this sort of attack happened. To me, the anonymity is going to be the bigger part to get people to participate in something like that whenever there's information sharing.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea of anonymity is something that's been now tried for 5 years, and it doesn't work.
Right.
It does. It. You know what? I had John Felker, who used to run the NKIC for CISA. He retired last year, and I had John Felker on the show, I think last year, before he retired, or several months before he retired. And one of the things we were talking about, it's a really unplugged interview. You guys should really listen to it, because John didn't hold back. He knew he was retiring, so he didn't hold back. But he goes, every company that sends us a information sharing template will rate it top secret, right?
Right.
So they'll name it top secret. So in the top secret, there's a different data processing protocol than, let's say, for example, public with a redaction of the name and the industry.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So top secret takes it 2 weeks to get out. By the time you get it from the NKIC and from CISA anonymously, you're like, yeah, we've been dealing with this for a week. Thanks for letting us know now. Instead of getting it right as it was getting started, where you could go in and really take care of it. We're always putting out fires. That's why I think anonymity no longer works. And I think immunity. I also think that immunity on this would encourage more organizations to invest more in security, because even if you do have immunity, the fact that you're going out to say is going to impact your stock price. It's probably going to impact your standing with the board, because there's nowhere to hide anymore. So the brand reputation damage is real. But let's move on to more comments, because I don't want this to be our debate today.
Right.
Dealt with a NAFI network incident response to do the same thing, a centralized point of failure. That's a straight insider threat. You were bringing that up. This is Jonathan again here commenting, good idea. That's how aircraft mishaps boards are conducted. Immunity is granted to all those unless criminal activity is discovered. Yeah. I mean, we can do that. So let's talk about the supply chain insider threat. Right, because that was, you actually awoke me to something that I really didn't think of until we did this, you and I were talking. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So what we were talking about here was the story happened last year, and it was over in a lot of the African countries. And essentially, what happened was a bunch of cell phones were found to have some backdoor / malware pre-installed as they went out. And it was a very interesting thing, because it was actually installed in the firmware from one of the components that was with the phone. So the people that actually did the phones, I think it was Transition. It was the Transition Techno W2 handsets. So they were used in Egypt, Ethiopia, South Africa, Cameroon, and Ghana. And basically, this had some built-in firmware that had a backdoor that would essentially, once they connected to a Wi-Fi network, turn around and sign them up for a bunch of ad campaigns. And it would simulate clicks, and it would make money for these folks through these campaigns using that person's device. And they had no idea this was going on. And again, even the phone retailer had no idea this was going on until it was discovered, a ways later. There's some pretty tricky stuff like that. There was even some arguments with Samsung having some issues with one of their vendors pre-installing some things on their phones that they weren't aware of.
Yeah, so you brought that up to me in a way, and I was like, wow, I really didn't think much about this. But if you're a global CISO and you have staff all over the world, right? So we're privileged. And what I mean by privileged is we have the ability to go into a Verizon or an Apple or a Samsung store or AT&T, and I'm by no means endorsing any one of those companies, and buying a brand new device in a sealed box that's never been used before, that's brand spanking new. And consumer laws here tell us that if you buy a refurbished device, it's got to be marked refurb on the device so that you as a consumer know that the device that you're buying is refurbished, right? The same applies in Europe, and the same applies in Australia and some developed nations. But when you look at the continent of Africa, South America, Eastern Europe, parts of the Middle East, parts of Southeast Asia, those folks get second and third hand devices right to their hands that are a lot of times preloaded with all kinds of funky stuff. That's an accidental insider threat right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of these countries, mobile is life. Right? They don't have the wired infrastructure we have here. They don't use laptops. They use all mobile devices. It's all tablets. It's all phones. It's all that kind of stuff. So their risk there, your risk picture over there is very different than it is for one of the other countries here where we tend to use, more PCs, Macs, MacBooks, laptops, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, they develop differently, and so those smart devices end up housing your email, maybe some of your business apps, maybe they access your company infrastructure through those phones, and everything is, especially like in Africa where we know a lot of the telecom networks is being built by China. So you like, I know that there are parts of AfricaCom, like of AFCOM for the military, where we invested to build our own infrastructure, communication infrastructure network, because we couldn't ride on the local one because it was being built by China.
Yep. Yeah, there's very unique situations over there. And, to your point, if you are a CISO for an organization over there, are you issuing devices to them? Are you as an organization issuing devices, or are you, in many cases, having them use their existing devices? Right? How are you going to handle that? And what are you thinking about with that? Because if now you're putting company data on existing devices that you have no idea where they got it from, they could have bought it new. They could have bought it out of a store used that did whatever after they wiped it. That's a whole different area to worry about.
That's a supply chain insider threat. Again, an accidental case. I'm curious for those watching us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, as you're commenting, what other scenarios of insider threats are you guys worried about? So what insider threats really concern all of you? Because Eric and I are here and we can banter all day long, but really as you tune in, we really want to answer your questions. And I'm curious to know, what are you guys thinking about when it comes to insider threat, right? Because the malicious, when you talked about Snowden, well, Snowden was kind of a malicious insider threat. And most insider threat could be attributed to complacency. Yeah. If you don't believe the movie, he didn't take it out the way they showed in the movie. That's just, that's just not how it happened.
Yeah. It's always a challenge because insider threats for the malicious ones, sometimes, I don't know. I've had issues before where we've had salespeople, and I beat up on salespeople all the time because, they're wonderful people, but sometimes they get a little aggressive in what they do. But I've had salespeople try to dump the entire Salesforce database and take it out the door to their new job. And they don't really think that it's being, they know it's not right, but they don't realize how significant and serious that is. But that can be very damaging for an organization if you steal all of those customers. And now these people are being contacted in a database that was only yours. That's actually come back. And I was at an organization who I won't name, but we had some people come back and go, I only used this email address to sign up for your thing. Like it was an email address with the company name after it, sort of thing, a disposable type. And they're like, and now I'm getting signed up for all these things. What did you do with my information? We're kind of like, that kind of stuff can happen. That can be pretty ugly for organizations, especially in places where privacy is a big deal, like in Europe and stuff like that.
Well, I think privacy is a big deal everywhere. Paul here has a question. I've seen an issue with the ITPR process.
Not familiar with the ITPR process.
Yeah, help Paul, would you mind just explaining what you mean by ITPR? A thread that I see internally is providing the same exact annual awareness training, no true face-to-face delivery, and true content-based quizzes after teaching it.
Yep. Amen and hallelujah, Paul. True story. You cannot, we're going to go on this awareness side. We got to do this. But
You are a security awareness advocate.
I
After all.
know. But I agree completely. I mean, different departments, even, different organizations, different departments, sometimes even different people within those departments, depending on how big a target they would be, like, CEO, CFO, people like that. They all need stuff that actually works for them. And I use this example a lot. I wouldn't train people in, let's say, a law firm the same way I would a Silicon Valley startup. And you have to be aware of that kind of stuff. So we need to kind of tailor that for people to understand the threats better.
Yeah, it's so a lot of times the accidental insider threat, which is what Paul's bringing up here, is the awareness employee who clicks on fails every single phishing email you do, right? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is because of an immature security awareness plan within an organization. Not all security awareness is created equal. And if you want to get an idea of that, I won't repeat it, but I'll tell you to go listen to the episode I did with James McQuiggan last month. We debated awareness versus culture versus technology. And I share the way we do awareness through culture and at the behest of technology within our organization, right? And so I don't want to repeat the same thing twice, 3 times over. I'll have you go back and listen to that because that's one. It plays right off of this, but number 2, I think it's a really good aspect of it. Paul continues to say here, DoD, we use the IT procurement process where we have to get 3 quotes, send it off to the comptroller. They, I think he means they find a better deal somewhere else for a somewhat matching product or solution.
Yes, but we also in the DoD had some very specific vendors that we could deal with. And that was something that came up over and over again. You get stuff from Chess, you get stuff off the list of, approved vendors or where procurement is going to buy. I actually know of a post-camp station sort of thing that they ordered a whole bunch of new network equipment and it all ended up having to get scrapped because it came off of a list that was, it wasn't part of the approved list. And of course, there's concerns about what could happen. There's always that story in the background, the super micro has the mini chip that, this, that, or backdoors in Cisco equipment that went through China. And there's always that fear with that. And I think in someone like DoD, that becomes a big deal. But I did see a whole lot of very expensive equipment have to get essentially scrapped because they bought outside of the procurement process. And that was such a big concern.
Yeah, beautiful. Joe here has a comment as well. Most of my recruiting is on the private sector side, but I talked to a ton of people looking to leave clear jobs within the government. I was thinking insider threats make sense as a sensible area to focus on and move into based on the trustworthiness already exemplified.
Let's see. It's a sensible area to focus on. Are we talking about like making note of that when you're trying to place them and say, hey, these people have already been cleared through insider threat type stuff? What are you getting out of that one, James?
So I'll tell you where I think he's going, and I may be off here, but I speak to a lot of MBA classes in cyber, and one of the things I talk about is the idea of recruiters, fake recruiters, reaching out to people in specific jobs within your organization and trying to get an idea from them by offering them a dream job at a different company that's going to give them their dream salary with their dream benefits. And while they're doing the interview, they're asking them all kinds of questions about their current role and some of the stuff they're currently working on. And the employee is none of the wiser to understand to the fact that they've just been literally social engineered through that. That's an actual real insider threat, and one that's very difficult, by the way, to come across, right? Because the employee isn't going to come and tell you, well, some recruiter contacted me on LinkedIn and said, I got this awesome job for you somewhere. It's going to pay you double of what you're making. It's going to give you double the benefits, and you're going to get double the time off. And in the call, I discussed all the secret stuff we're working on here.
Yeah.
To try and get this job. And I think it's fake.
Yeah, or financials, they start talking to people about, well, this is $1 billion company. I don't know if you're actually, I got to sell you to these people that you'll be able to handle something like that. What's your income over there? And they can actually, I've seen this where they actually pull information out of people that is used by competitive resources and other things like that can get folks into trouble. Social engineering is a very real thing, and it happens more often, I think, than people understand. And a lot of times it's unreported. You give up a little nugget of information here, little nugget of information there, maybe throw in some other stuff there. And before you know it, you've given up some really good information, and then you never hear about that job again.
Yeah. So, Joe says, thanks for addressing it and sorry for any confusion. What you just mentioned definitely happens. Yeah, I'm sure it does, Joe. It happens all the time. We actually train. So that's why security awareness training isn't created equal, right? It's got to be customized to different people within your department. This is a training you kind of have to go on and do. We do this type of training of the description I just did to the people who hold the keys to the kingdom, who work on very specific projects. And we let them know that if you're being interviewed, we don't mind you exploring whatever career opportunities you have. So we've set up an anonymous way for them to send us to vet recruiters they're about to speak with.
Brilliant. There's a lot of scams about that too, where recruiters will come in and, I need the last 4 of your social to be able to submit this to them. And I mean, they're not even really recruiters. They're gathering information on that basis too, just to kind of steal identity and do stuff like that. Because if you think about it, you give up a lot of sensitive information when you're applying for jobs. And that's another way that they do that on a personal level. I've seen that. I've actually had recruiters ask me for that information. I'm like, yeah, no, we're not going to. No, we really need your last 4 of your social. And, what was your first pet's name and your mom's maiden name? I mean, it's not quite that obvious, but they did ask for some really interesting stuff that made me feel uncomfortable. And you do see that out there in the real world.
Yeah. So Tom says this, I'm sure it might be difficult, but I think a company should openly share who they sell your information to. This would probably lessen how many people may sign up or subscribe to their site. That's why they'll never, ever tell you.
Every marketing person in the world just twitched when they read this.
Yeah, every marketing person is twitching in their seats going like, no. Facebook will now sue you, Tom, for antitrust. You might get deplatformed for this idea, Tom.
Right. What's next? 0 byte pixels? I mean, or 0 pixel images. I mean, how are we going to tell if they opened it? How are we going to,
zero trust, zero trust pixels.
Man, I've told marketing, I'm like, y'all are creepy with the stuff you do. They really are. But yeah.
Paul brings up the idea that I think contract to hire also provides a level of insider threat and vulnerability. Yeah, but I think that's a business risk for most organizations, meaning they know. I mean, so I don't want to mention vendors by name, but there's one vendor. A lot of the vendors that do the crowdsourcing pen testing, for example, where they're really vetting the people, but the people could be anywhere in the world. And they've got these platforms that monitor what they do and are kind of looking and so forth. So there's that aspect to this where the business knows what risk it's taking on in most cases and is able to kind of control and moderate that risk from an insider threat level. But contract to hire, that's one insider threat. I mean, the other insider threat, and we can talk about this a little bit more, and we saw this happening more in the era. I think the era of COVID is going to prove to be the most detrimental for insider threat.
Okay.
And I'll explain. So think of a family working. So early on in COVID, probably for about 4 to 6 months, while people were still like going like, all right, 15 days to explode the spread, turn to a month, turn to 3 months, turn to 6 months, But in that time period, most people sat with their kids around the dining room table, the one that you seldomly used before COVID. And you had your laptops open your kids were on their iPads doing schoolwork or on their computer issued devices, like school issued devices. Your spouse or partner or whoever was also working. And if they're self-employed, they may not have the same security guidelines. If they work for a different organization, they may have different things go on. And they could be a victim of a breach or of some sort of incident. And that's impacting you. We know that, taking over IoT devices at home. So, we used to be able to control an office environment by not letting an Alexa sit on someone's desk. Yeah. But now everyone's working from home and there's an Alexa and an Echo everywhere in. And while you're talking on a call and now, no one talks sitting down anymore, right? You get up, you put on your headset, you're walking around your house because, you're bothering your partner with, they're trying to focus, or you both have a call at the same time. So one's in the bedroom, one's somewhere else. And the Alexas are picking up all that sound. All that data is going somewhere.
Yep.
And I think that's the biggest insider threat we're going to start seeing.
Yeah. They've even talked about having the right to listen to those things to improve quality and all of that stuff. You see, here's my Alexa. It's currently unplugged sitting next to me because, I liked it, but now that I'm working from home, there is stuff that gets discussed. I think there's also an issue you kind of touched on there a little bit, is there were a lot of people that went home during COVID that their kids didn't have a school issued device, and all they had was a work issued laptop themselves or something like that. So they start sharing these devices with the kids. So the kids are playing games on it or doing schoolwork and doing whatever they're doing. And then you come back and you connect to the VPN or whatever. I mean, look at the lawyer, I am not a cat. Okay. He did not set up that filter. We know he didn't set up that filter. Probably one of his kids set up that filter and then he couldn't pull it off. But that's somebody else on that device, right? If you think about that, he was mortified by that. But that was somebody else using the device that set that thing up, and obviously ended up, rolling over to this courtroom situation. I mean, I feel bad for the poor guy.
Your Honor, I am not a cat.
Right. Right. But that was a classic example of someone else had used his stuff that he's also using for work. And so, kids are your insider threat too, right?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different aspects of that are very, very, I want to say concerning a little bit. Yeah. There's also bits and pieces of it that create create kind of the unawareness of technology. So you hand a phone to a kid, I don't care how tech savvy you are, they're going to teach you something you didn't think of.
Yeah. That's a true story. I mean, they've been so immersed in it from childhood.
Yeah. I've said that there's going to be a study that has to come out, and I'm like, I want this study I want people to participate in this study. Like, I think we need to do this study for the sake of humanity. And here's my study. Take 40 pregnant women, 20 do nothing but on our smart devices, laptops, and tablets. The other 20 only get books and papers. And then watch the kids adapt to technology after they're born. I think kids know how to use technology because they're getting part of that in the DNA as they grow in the mother's womb.
Interesting. You think it's that deep, huh?
I think it's that deep. Because there's no other explanation whatsoever to it beyond the fact that how does a kid instinctively know how to use something right when they're born if it isn't for the direct actions of the mother who's carrying that baby? And if we did this study, I guarantee you that the kids who read the books, if you hand them a book at any age, they're going to know exactly how to turn pages. They're going to know not to rip the book into shreds. They're going to look at the book and they're going to cherish the book. Whereas with the other kids, you hand them a phone and they're just going to, and I think it's actually built into that process. I think that's a very interesting study because Steve Jobs and a lot of the people who invented the smart technology talked about the fact that they wouldn't let their kids touch it, or they would only give their kids half an hour a day on these devices.
I said that when I was a new parent too.
And then you're like, I can't deal with my kid.
Right. Right. Well, now they're doing school. Now they're doing all this kind of stuff with these devices, right? So, and as a parent, how do you differentiate when they're on YouTube having fun watching something and when they're actually doing schoolwork, unless you're standing there staring them all the time, and or monitoring internet usage and all those kinds of things that can be counterproductive, right?
Yeah, I mean, nature versus nurture. It's very interesting. I mean, I'll tell you, my niece, her mom read to her a lot. So, she's almost 4 now, but she barely spends any time on smart devices, and she spends more time on books. And she's very much like, she doesn't have any ripped up books or books that are drawn on. She just doesn't. Yeah. Right. To the contrary of some other, kids that I've seen that have been. That's why I think that, that's where it starts. But going back, as we kind of, we're rounding up to the top of the hour here, slowly and surely, folks. But, we talk about insider threat, and insider threat has and will remain probably the single most significant threat to any organization. So what are some of your best practices around insider threats?
Yeah. Well, I think, you talked earlier about culture, and I think culture has a lot to do with it, building a culture inside an organization. Okay. Because especially, I'm the security guy, I'm the CISO, I'm whatever. I can't keep track of everything that's going on out there, but I'll tell you this. One thing I learned in the DoD and in the military environments is a culture of security goes a long ways, right? Now, if you build that culture, you have people looking around going, you know what, this seems a little odd. This person is living beyond their means. Why is Bob driving a brand new vet when he's, 2 years into the job in a medium, salary position? There's all these things that happen that they actually teach you to look for spies and insider threats. That becomes part of the culture within the organization. And I think far too often we don't concentrate on the overall culture and just do we want to make sure that somebody is aware that this can happen. And so you show them this and you expect them to know how to handle it, but it goes much deeper than that. We actually have to do more about making the culture. And the person that asked earlier about people coming out of the DoD, that is something that I think the DoD does a great job of, especially if you're working with classified materials and stuff, is they teach you a culture of security, and those people will already be predisposed, at least for a while, to continue that culture because that's what they're used to.
Yeah, so that's one way. So let's look at it from a civilian standpoint, okay? Because it's very easy for us to talk DoD. Yeah. We're all former DoD. We've all been trained in some way, or we don't even walk outside without doing a, yeah. we just. I have a neighbor who's a Vietnam War vet. And when we both walk outside in the morning, we both do the same exact thing. Now we're 3 generations apart. So let that sink in.
Yeah. Yeah. Within organizations, just individually, I think, one of the key things you have to look for is the baseline, like what's normal. And then you start looking for things that are abnormal. Okay. So that's from the malicious side.
But you're talking about user behavior analytics.
In a way. Yeah. In a way, I'm talking about even within the other people looking around and noticing that Tom seems super disgruntled and he's been pissed for a week and he's staying late and, coming in early, and yet he seems very upset about things. Those should be red flags for people to look at. Now, that can be challenging to work with. It really can, especially in the non-military side of things. But I think you need to have a basis. You need to know what's normal and then work from there. And it's a tough thing.
So I'm going to challenge you on this a little bit. And that's why I love the show. All right. So we get to challenge each other a little bit on that. And then we're going to get to Paul's comment here. Right. So 2 things. One, normal to you and normal to me are 2 very, very different things.
Right.
And I'll tell you something very interesting. Speak to a CISO who's former DoD like myself, and then speak to a CISO who's a civilian who maybe came out from IT or legal right into the CISO role. We're 2 very different people. He views insider threat as a legal and HR issue, where I view insider threat as a business operation and business continuity issue, right? Because to me, insider threat has more impact there than it does. The legal is always going to work itself out, right? I don't care about the legal aspect of it. I care about the business continuity of it and business operations of it. Because if it stops the business, then I've failed at my mission. My mission in security is to keep the business running, not to let the business halt all activity. Because as you said, Bob decided to hold the whole city of San Francisco ransom because he's the only guy who understood how everything works. Yeah. Right? So I think that's one aspect of it. So normal doesn't have a baseline, right? So the way we have to look at it, I think, is, and here's my suggestion, is there is no such thing as normal, but there is normal per role or normal per expectation of what a specific person will do. Mm-hmm. So this will take me down the road of AI versus ML, right? I was on a sales call earlier this week with a company, and the rep's telling me, we use real AI. And so I'm like, okay, let's figure out if you're really using real AI. And I was like, so tell me how your AI works. And he goes, well, we study the activities that go on in your network, and then we start to gradually adapt to them. And I was like, that's machine learning. And he goes, no, that's AI. And I'm like, no, that's machine learning. Now, I can tell why you'd get it confused with AI, but AI stands for artificial intelligence. The process that you just described is machine learning. So artificial intelligence indicates that the technology you have has a standard baseline of intelligence, and that based on that standard baseline of intelligence, it then starts to adapt to things that go on within the system, and therefore artificially becomes more intelligent, rather than machine learning, which studies the activity of a specific machine, learns that activity, then notifies a human. See, machine learning is very much still human monitored. AI has no human interaction whatsoever.
And that's how Skynet started. Am I wrong?
But no, you're right. But I say that because people argue this point to me all the time, and I'm like, you have to understand there's no such thing as standard. So let's identify what would be an acceptable level of normal activity. Meaning, for example, if you've got an employee that at 2 a.m. for 3 nights in a row is logging into the system, red flag. Mm-hmm. Not normal.
Well, you need to know what the baseline is, and then you need to know what's an acceptable deviation.
Correct.
If it's 20 minutes a day, hey, maybe there's something going on. That's not a huge deviation. But that all comes down to also us making the risk calls on that too.
Skynet is in Tampa.
Yeah, I won't comment on that. But I, for one, welcome our new machine overlords, just in case they're watching.
They are watching. We're on YouTube. I can concur with that. We use it. Paul says this. I concur with that. We use a temporary assignment security officer in each department to conduct face-to-face trainings and make the ISSM/ISSO job run smoother.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a great comment, Paul. And yes, Skynet is in Tampa, and you're in Tampa, and so I get why you are bowing to your overlords at this point.
I'll be the first to go, right?
You're like Erich Kron, destroy.
Yeah.
Erich Kron has been destroyed.
So the thing about, we're talking about all these different types of insider threat. And I think that one of the key things we have to understand is there are so many types of insider threat. We can't bundle them into just one thing and go at it from there. And ultimately, I don't think there's a silver bullet out there. I think, we're still going to be struggling with this for a long time. Even with new technologies in place, even with the human factor in place, it's still going to be one of our biggest challenges, whether it's accidental or on purpose, right? The day that I stop hearing breaches tied to S3 buckets being unsecured is the day I'm going to rejoice, right? But I think that's still a long ways off.
So very interesting you bring up that, because what if we have an opportunity here to fix security at the ground level? But it starts with the cloud providers. What if you couldn't build on the cloud if it wasn't security by design?
But is that their job to do that? They're providing you a service or a platform. They're providing security on their devices they give to you. Do you want the providers telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing and what your risk acceptance is within your organization and having that kind of power or authority over you?
So how much money does it cost those providers every time one of their clients goes through a cybersecurity incident?
I honestly don't know. I would think very little because they've done their part to secure their stuff, right?
Right, but when your client goes offline and he's no longer running anything, you're not making any money.
True, and that's
then that client is calling you to try to help restore some stuff. So now you're wasting valuable man hours trying to help this client, and that could be an hour or it could be 150 hours, right? You just don't know.
But that's part of the business model. Should they be telling us, you know what, you're using an older version of JavaScript. We don't like that. We feel it's unsecure. Therefore, we're not going to provide this to you, or we're going to cause something else to go on here. I mean, where do we draw that line? So,
insider threat from a DevOps perspective, which we didn't really talk about. We've got a few more minutes left, so we can kind of, briefly touch on it. But the insider threat from an open source DevOps cloud perspective, I think is the greatest single threat to any organization, especially considering the fact after SolarWinds, and now we're seeing Acelion. We saw Saita yesterday, a few days ago. I think that this is where organizations have the largest and most difficult time to secure from an insider threat perspective, and predominantly from the accidental side. So we saw a bunch of researchers set up a bunch of open repositories that mimicked private repositories, and a lot of the researchers started pulling from the public ones rather than the private one. They didn't know the difference, but all the public ones had backdoors and lines of code that were malicious. And so when we talk about the insider threat beyond kind of the human element, not beyond the human element, the most human of all elements isn't the phishing click. It's the DevOps guy at the ground level pulling from a repository somewhere on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or anywhere that's malicious in nature.
Right.
And this is why I kind of go down the idea of whose responsibility really is it. And then you go, well, it's a service and they can charge a premium for it. So while they might be free today, they could go to a startup. And if I'm, for example, Google Cloud, right? I could go to a startup and be like, you could use our unsecured open platform and do whatever you want. Or you can use our premium secured security by design cloud platform. Now, this is going to increase everything you're doing. It's going to help you win customers greater because Google's going to sign off and say that we've got the baselines covered. And GitHub and GitLab could do the same exact thing from their code repositories. You've got, but this is a premium service that they can charge and make money off. This is why CISOs need to be sitting at the higher board level in some of these organizations, pushing this kind of stuff out. Because if you push this kind of stuff out, you create more value for your organization. You're going to drive more revenue. And overall, you're going to address it at the baseline where it really hurts, right? And that's where I think we need to go on this insider threat stuff from a DevOps perspective is, can the big companies that deal with, you and I are security guys. Everyone that's watching here is in the security echo chamber. We all listen to all these different podcasts. We all follow the same people. I made 2020 my year to step outside the echo chamber. And by doing that in 2021, I'm stepping outside even more. But by doing that now, I realize where our greatest weakness is. It's not the assistant clicking the phishing email. It's not. Yes, will they still click it? Yes, but technology, awareness, and culture, when it comes to that kind of stuff, has gotten so good that the way to fall for it is by the tenfold attack, right? Meaning if we used to get 1 million phishing emails and only 100 made it through, now we're getting 10 million phishing emails and 1,000 are getting through.
That's true. Yeah.
So that percentage, and we're just going to have to keep playing with that percentage, and it is what it is. And but because we've gotten so good at it, right? Thanks a lot to KnowBe4. I mean, I'm a KnowBe4 customer, so thanks a lot to KnowBe4, right? The way you guys do awareness training and the technology and kind of the intersection of it all works. Okay. But then at the same time, we have to kind of go back and look at where does our vulnerability exist the most, and it's at DevOps. And it's at the baseline. It's at your foundation. So, for an example, I was in Kosovo, and in Pristina, we were building a new U.S. embassy. And the U.S. embassy, the new U.S. embassy that was being built, had all American contractors, had 24/7, 365 security, and had the kind of technology on site so that no one could get into the foundation and install stuff within the foundation. Oh, sorry there. So that no one within the foundation of it, right, could get in and put listening devices or radio transmitters in the foundation of the building that could be turned on at any time once the building is live. So we understood that, right? It took us the Cold War to understand that. So we need to do the same thing in cyber, right? Which is, how do we make sure that there's no listening devices in the foundation of the technology we're building? And that starts in DevOps.
And that's very true for technical organizations or people building technical products.
Correct.
But that's not every organization out there.
But that's 80%. Even if you do an e-commerce and you're building a WordPress site to sell your t-shirts, you're technological. You've got a supply chain. And these WordPress, WooCommerce, Shopify sites have more vulnerabilities than one can imagine.
Well, that's true. That's right. They are always getting exploited and used. And yeah, you know what? It's interesting today, actually, on our blog, there was a Stanford study that came out that said 88% of data breaches are caused by human error. So as we're talking about this, that's a pretty significant number. You know, and we all know this. You know, it's generally human error, and it is people not securing things, people not doing best practices. I think that's a great thing that we should be doing is making sure that we have best practices out there available for people in things that are readable by the average. I don't want to say by the average Joe, because they're going to have some technical, background. But for example, how do here's the best practices for securing an S3 bucket or moving to the cloud, and letting people know these are the things you ought to look for. Things like, hey, be careful what GitHub repo you're pulling stuff from. Make sure it's the right one. It's not a fork of something somebody else did and is now playing with. There needs to be more of that out there, maybe even from a central place. Maybe CISA can do something like that, right? But right now, people are still stumbling around in the blind on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Paul's last comment here as we wrap up is, this is where I believe in MSSPs in cases like Deepwatch being your service as a cost solution.
But MSSPs and MSPs have been targeted by attackers quite a bit recently. Because they get into that and then they turn around, and that's a whole nother insider threat, supply chain threat thing we could talk about. You look at what happened with Wipro. It's happened several times with other organizations. There was one MSP, 70% of their clients, well, a bunch of their clients got hit with ransomware. They ended up having to pay for 70% of them for the ransom because their backups, which were provided by the MSP, which got infected, were no longer available because they got encrypted, right? That's a whole nother level. I love the MSP and MSSP model. I really do, for a lot of organizations, because it can give them that expertise that they don't have in-house and don't necessarily need to hire someone full-time to do. I love the model for that. But that is a whole nother level of threat there too.
It is. It is, and I have nothing to add. You said it perfectly. I think, MSPs and MSSPs are sometimes the shoe salesman that's walking barefoot.
Yeah, well, and we have this pattern of MSPs all of a sudden labeling themselves as MSSPs just because they offer something, you know what I mean? Something security related, and they're not the same thing.
They're not. Folks, well, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank Erich for coming on the program. For everyone watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, make sure to subscribe, follow the CyberHub podcast page, go to our YouTube page, and also subscribe there and turn on the notification bell when you do that. That way you'll know every time we go live and post a brand new video. Thank you to KnowBe4 for their support and sending Erich on this show. It really fit. It wasn't for their support, this podcast wouldn't be where it is today. It's sponsors like KnowBe4 that really help support our organization. So make sure to, show them a little bit of love as well. Monday, we'll be back with the Practitioner Brief live at 9 a.m. Yesterday, CISO Talk, Gray Myers Cleaves, the CISO over at Hollard Insurance from the Lounge Down Under in Australia, joined me on the CISO Talk podcast. If you haven't subscribed and gone and checked that out, you should. Go check it out. A great discussion over the supply chain and just cyber and hiring, careers, cyber, just the whole nine. And we had a very interesting conversation about the workforce shortage in Australia and how it's different from in the US. It's extremely different. Very, very interesting conversation there as well. So please go check that out. For everyone who commented, thank you so much for spending this time with all of us. And we really do. I'm very grateful for your support and grateful that you find value in our content. So please make sure to share it and subscribe as well. Till then, guys, have a great weekend. And most importantly, stay safe, wear masks, social distance, go get vaccinated, and stay cyber safe as well. Don't fall for that phishing link. Please just say no. Cheers, guys.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.